we already have more than 110 participants. We can begin, I guess. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to everyone. On behalf of the CIPA Emerging Professionals, we would like to welcome you for the second part of our webinar series, Accessing Heritage Places from Home, with the title Virtual Reality, Unlocking the Potential. The main moderator for today will be Dr. Sara Gonici-Barsanti, whom we would like to first introduce and then invite to describe the topic for us. So I will pass the baton to Rebecca to introduce Sara.
Hi, thanks, Strathis. So Sarah graduated in classical archaeology at Sapienza University of Rome in 2003. She holds a PhD from the University of Trieste with a thesis entitled Historical Urban Geographic Information System of the Forum Iuli. In 2012, she specialized in the use of survey systems for cultural heritage, achieving a specialization in archaeology with a thesis on 3D survey of the so-called Byzantine walls of Aquila. Since 2012, she's been dealing with research in the field of reality-based 3D survey, reverse engineering, VR and cultural heritage, and in January 2018, she obtained a PhD in mechanical engineering with a thesis on the use of reality-based 3D models for structural analysis of cultural heritage. Without further ado, Sarah.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I would like to thank CIPA Heritage Documentation, the International Council of Monuments and Sites, the National Trust for Canada, and the NSERC CREATE program for supporting this event, and the panelists for their interesting presentation, all the participants for being present. I will do a short introduction and then leave the floor to more attractive topics. And so reverse engineering are well-known techniques for analyzing, studying, preserving, and visualizing cultural heritage assets. And 3D models' potential is fully accomplished when they are used to interactively communicate their significance to non-specialists. Immersive technologies like virtual and augmented reality are valid tools to interact with 3D models and help make culture more accessible to the wider public. And thanks to their flexibility, they can help museum curators to adapt cultural proposal and information about artifacts based on different types of visitors categories. And these technologies allows visitors to travel through space and time, have fun, and get educated on complicated topics. Also, virtual and augmented technology are extremely useful to recreate lost or hidden environments, to lead to a better comprehension of a site, or to allow people to discover important places that are not visible, both for security or conservation reasons. And in a period where we are forced to stay at home, these technologies show their full potential, allowing us to navigate and discover museums, archaeological sites, monuments all around the world. In this webinar, we will share some of the ways various experts are using these tools to bring culture and heritage into your home. The distinctiveness of this webinar lies in the variety of topics touched. So we will start from storytelling of specific, little known but really interesting culture by Brett Levy from Virtual Songlines Australia, to video games for understanding and navigating a famous archaeological site by Sofia Viscardi, CNRISPC Italy. Then we will see virtual reality applied to the study and navigation through an important monument by Joshua Chartrand from Carlton Immersive Media Studio, Canada. And then the concept of virtual museum intended as an entity that expands the real one by Damiano Aiello from University of Catania, Italy. The final presentation will discuss the sound labs integrated in the Library of Voices and how they enable new and innovative ways to study intangible heritage by Rudy Knops from KU Leuven, Belgium. Sorry. So the webinar is suitable for everyone, so multiple levels of technical knowledge from beginners to expert. And before starting with the presentation, I would like to introduce you Professor Mario Santana Quintero, ICOMOS Vice President. Thank him for delivering the welcome remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for this excellent overview of what is coming up in this webinar. I don't want to take too much of your time. I would like to welcome you on behalf of the International Council of Monuments and Sites, ICOMOS, which is a non-for-profit organization. We are a network of over 11,000 professionals in the field of conservation and cultural heritage. We are one of the advisory council organizations for the World Heritage Convention, and we have a network of more than 150 national committees and more than 50 scientific committees, and one of them is CIPA. And CIPA has a group of emerging professionals, which are the ones in charge of this webinar. We collaborate with the National Trust for Canada and with the NSERC Heritage Engineering Program at Carlton University to bring this content to you. Now, I think this morning I was listening to an ICOMS resilience webinar in the situation of COVID-19. And also yesterday, I listened to Obama's message about inequality. I'm not an expert on inequality. I support, the protest and change. But one of the things that Obama said was that he was very proud to see so many young people actively involved in change and to provide meaningful change. And I was thinking to myself, because I'm getting a little bit older now, and actually Brett, who's going to be our first speaker, I met him 23 years ago in Japan. And we're slightly older than that time that we met. And I was asking to myself, did we make any difference so far? And I don't really know if I have made any difference, but I'm really glad to see that we have brought this group of experts to the stage, and many of them are emerging professionals, and they're really engaged in making substantial change in this situation of presenting sites using digital tools. And I'm sure that all of you after this webinar will be as proud as I am of our group of experts. So thank you very much.
So is it over to me? Here he goes.
Oh, hi. I'll just jump in. I'm Chris Weeb. I'm the manager of Heritage Policy and Public Programs here at the National Trust for Canada. And we are so pleased to be collaborating with CIPA EP, ICOMOS, and the NSERC Create Heritage Engineering Program at Carleton University on this webinar. Really looking forward to it. Just a few words about the National Trust. Created in 1973, the National Trust is Canada's national membership-based charity that leads and inspires action for heritage places. We have a long track record of working with communities to save heritage places through legislative change, direct advocacy, fundraising, community revitalization, and our national conference. You can learn more about our programs and benefits and become a member if you want at nationaltrustcanada.ca. One of our tools to help save historic places is the Regeneration Works website here on the screen in front of you. And you'll find a recording of this webinar there and also on CIPA EP's YouTube channel later, along with toolkits and other materials. We encourage you to share your thoughts and keep the conversation going on social media. So thanks again, and looking forward to today's truly global learning opportunity, and very excited about it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sarah, Mario, and Chris for the introduction. Our first speaker for today is Brett, who was very kind to join us after midnight. And I'm really excited for his presentation. We are deeply thankful to him. Brett is a virtual heritage practitioner with a business called Bilby Labs that reconstructs historical Australian Aboriginal heritage in Australian capital cities and regional towns. Authentically, virtual song lines immerses users in the culture and heritage using serious gaming technologies. He has dedicated his working life to digital cultural heritage storytelling to record and respectfully represent the arts, cultural stories, heritage, traditional knowledge, and histories of First Nation people. Brett employs new immersive and interactive technologies to create entertaining and engaging systems to present the interactions between first settlers and traditional peoples. The floor is yours, Brett. Thank you.
Thanks very much. It's an honor, really. And when I see some of the things you do, I see connections to First Nations people around the world, and that's what we want to share our stories about here in Australia. I want to start off and just show you my screen before I go much further, and present a short, or a number of videos in particular, and here they come. I want to stop sharing there. I've got a few others to show, but in effect, that work was 9 years ago. So we've come a long way since then, but that's at least the start of what we're trying to achieve. And our work, in effect, in virtual heritage storytelling, it's about building a software development kit that I think we can use to enable the rekindling of those stories, the connection of our heritage here in Australia for all Aboriginal people in our capital cities and regional towns. Now, we're working firstly on 50 iterations of this. And that time that we're looking to set, because it's a big question, is 1 day before first settlement in each one of those places. 1 day before the disruption of that heritage of our original custodians caring for land, living where they did in the places that they have. I don't know if anybody's aware in the world that 250 years ago, about a month ago, Captain Cook landed in Botany Bay, which for First Nations peoples is called Kamay. Virtual Songlines as a toolkit is looking to rename each one of those places to its original custodial name. And there's a few of those names you can imagine as we do this work and work with Indigenous people as we do. We've got an extremely long story to tell. And I respect the virtual heritage possibilities and all my colleagues that have done so much great work across the world, because that inspires us here to look at how we might do that. Let me show you and share another video moving forward, and just because I think that I have a lot to show, and a lot to show after many, many years, having first met Mario so many years ago. This is something that I think is important to show, and shows the connection we have with community and the champions of their culture in a regional location.
Brett, I just wanted to let you know that we can't hear the sound from the video.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'll keep talking to that And what I'm saying, what this fellow's saying here is, and I don't think you're hearing the audio, is that we're using motion capture technologies, and a guy called Chris Hemsworth was in that suit before my cousin was in it. If you heard of Chris Hemsworth, it's a bit of a sore point for my cousin, if you get my drift. This technology and collaboration with QT is very important to us. And that motion capture tends to capture the movements of our people, the movements in such a way that's quite extraordinary. And I think that what I was trying to show there is that the idiosyncrasies of our movement, and then bringing that into a digital artifact, bringing the blood of First Nations people into the digital is so important in the work we do here. That slow iteration, and therefore to capture the dances across 300 nations and those unique dances, 6 of them at a time, times 300 is what we want to capture just in one aspect of the dance and the variation of that dance across Australia. So this particular session here, we did it over 2 weeks, and we captured 24 dances from 12 different groups. And that is going to be ongoing and continuing on. Dance being just one aspect of the cultural map we're doing across the country. If I go a bit further, the work we've done in that, we have then generated into a whole cultural landscape for these certain locations. And Sydney being as iconic as it was, we wanted to take away the bricks and mortar of the city and then reconstruct that in both PC, mobile apps, and also in VR. So we're trying to get people to actually perform the acts. This particular work we're seeing here, which was just in Australia Day, we wanted to showcase Sydney Harbour or Sydney Cove 1 hour before the arrival of the first fleet. And the first fleet arrived in Australia to settle Australia in 1788. And we felt like the technology with the kids could be used and then showcased in this way. What you're seeing on the screen here, if you're seeing it, is that we're taking the surveillance for artists' works of the time by famous works by a gentleman by the name of Lycett. He was a first fleet artist, and then taking that work and then putting that into the world and reconstructing that event and then bringing that work to life. So in effect, those works were sent back to England and showing the king and the administration there that, well, this is what Australia was like, this is the culture that it was, and I think they were very good models that we could build upon. This terrain is topographically correct. The vegetation is generated by Geoscience Australia soil maps. Our vegetation grows over time. This is what we can do at this moment in time with the technology. So as my colleagues would know, the vision is there, but we work within the limitations of the technology that we have. This one is another one that I've got doing there. Now this is, again, a longer version, which I want to play, which is an example of the Sydney project once more. And I think you'll see that it is the aspect of the water. What we were trying to capture there with the water is the traditional farming practices at those locations. These middens that you're seeing on the shore here at Barangaroo, which is just across from Sydney Cove, were the lime used to build the buildings there. And they were actually, the thing about using that lime that we try to represent here was that lime was, those places, those middens were also further away from there, the burial sites for our people. And though I'm not trying to tell those stories directly, I'm trying to get people to, or any mainstream Australian using our applications and being in these worlds, to actually walk in our footsteps. to follow our pathways and to connect with our First Nations people. And in a sense, there's some very important values that we're trying to achieve here, which is about things like fellowship for our people, mateship, which is an old Australian value as well, community, and those challenges that we need to see fashioned by a respect for our First Nations people that might see a greater understanding and I suppose community in that regard. And I might say that today, right this minute, there's a whole debate and a whole raft of marches going, which I think I think Murray might have mentioned it earlier, about the fact that we feel in Australia that Black lives do matter. And in the work we do, we want to make that statement known in the type of work that we're doing in this representation. This that you're seeing here may be a video, but it's actually a 3D immersive environment. And in building that environment the way we are building it, it can then be generated onto any digital device, a smart TV, an Xbox, a PlayStation, any VR device. But our penchant at the moment is the Oculus Quest and the Oculus Rift in the first instance, and the Oculus Quest as we start to look at getting people to actually move in a virtual space within some limitations that allows. And so that's the nature of the work. These images you're seeing here represent that importance, and from long ago, this fluidity of movement is something that I think we've got to respect in the work that we do, working with communities across Australia. This version, as I'll say, would be Sydney. There's iterations in Brisbane, Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth. They're our largest Australian capital cities, ranging in populations from 1.5 to nearly 4.5 million people each city. And we're looking at regional towns as well. We want those communities to know that prior to this time, the sovereign owners and the custodians for that land were First Nations people, and that struggle to survive, which I think many of our brothers and sisters across the world would know, is something that we want to do. So there's a real gamification of what we do, but also a deep seriousness to rekindle those stories that our elders have told us and passed on since time immemorial. I'll stop sharing that screen now. That's the nature of my presentation, and also a little bit about the work. I could talk quite technically about the bits to it. My team at the moment is 9 strong. I have collaborations with historians and archaeologists here in Australia who help us to give veracity and validity to the work we do. And in that regard, we also have some collaborations with wonderful universities as well as museums, which are allowing us to do some photogrammetry on artifacts that they hold, and also and put those particular artifacts back into the landscape where they belong. So rather than be behind a glass cabinet, we like to see them physically used and modeled, and then look at all those bits that go into that reconstruction. So that's some of it. This is the work. In effect, the showcasing is just a result of the application of our toolkit, which we are slowly and iteratively researching, developing, and improving over time. So there you go. That's virtual songlines. That's our contribution to virtual heritage, and that's some of the challenges as we've got. I'll leave it to the rest of you to have a look and keep viewing. Watch this space.
We don't hear you, Rebecca.
And that's what I have already talked to others about. Goodness gracious. Thanks, Brett, for the fantastic presentation. I want to remind everyone that if you have questions at any point during the presentations, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the menu. These will be addressed at the end of all the presentations. So the second speaker for our webinar that I'd like to introduce is Sofia Viscardi. She was the one who kindly told me that I was muted. Her research interests cover a wide domain that includes virtual archaeology, landscape reconstruction, digital heritage, virtual museums, embodied cognition and museology, applied games, interactive media design, and multimodal design. Is there anything you don't do, Sofia? Very accomplished list. Since 2018, she's been a professor at the University of Bologna, where she teaches intangible heritage and multimedia, and at the University of Ferrara, where she teaches multimodal design for the Master of Innovation Design program. Some of her projects include the Virtual Museum of the Scrovegni Chapel of Giotto in Padua, Virtual Rome, Archeo-Virtual, Virtual Museum of Western Han Dynasty, Aquae Patinovae VR, and A Night in the Forum video game. Sofia, please share your screen.
Thanks so much. Let me share my screen. Here we are. First of all, I would like to thanks so much for this invitation and thanks CIPA and the ICOMOS for the work they're doing, and the fact that we are here all together from so different parts of the world is really, really fantastic. So I'm excited, and I hope that in these 15 minutes I can open up probably also some discussion, some issues that I feel they're still out there in the VR domain and in the digital heritage domain. So let's start. First of all, something that everybody knows, Petra, no? The problem is that actually no virtual experience into an historical site could replace a real visit, at least not yet. And the reason is not only the lack of the realism of digital scenarios, of those digital scenarios that we might develop, not the type of interaction, the immersivity level, the interface, also the storytelling that we can design. Actually, the reason lays on the fact that we cannot use all our senses to feel the environment in VR. In the last year, there has been a lot of works in neurosciences, really interesting studies that have further advanced this understanding on how we are built. And actually, it is not only a matter of sensing and feeling, because the way we think, we understand concepts, we develop new thoughts, we get to know the world around us is intrinsically embodied. Knowledge acquisition is based on our body. It is grounded into the physicality of the world. And concepts, as scientists in brain sciences are discovering, concepts themselves are to be considered embodied. And real experience is embodied. But on the other side, we are here because we feel, we know, we understand the potential of the VR immersive environment. What you are seeing here is just a video from the real official site of the new amazing engine, the 5th version of the engine that is supporting full capability of really, really high number of polygons in a near future, enabling us working in digital acquisition to really keep the quality of our data. We understand also the potential of VR in teaching, improving knowledge. There has been a lot of work in VR and learning, and also trying to increase the understanding of museums, collection, a lot of work in about virtual museums. And also with VR, potentially we can take visitors in distant and inaccessible places. And this is what potentially could have happened also in this COVID period. So immersivity and interactivity are defined as the key elements, those that can create the sense of presence. But these technical aspects are not enough actually to fulfill visitor expectations. So I wanted to start from real visitor expectation. When they decided to go in a place to start a journey in a cultural tourism journey. And actually what we are seeing around online, at least online, is not a lot. It's not so close to our expectation. I'm talking about the virtual visits. You can find the 360-degree visits, in some cases with some audio, but also in the more interesting examples of computer graphics exploration online. Sometimes I feel that there's something that is missing. Because a real experience, in a real experience, visitors are present. And they lead a mix of emotional and cognitive engagement. And actually, beyond cognition and emotion, there is also a third component, that is sociality. And we sometimes forget about it. In most cases, we travel not alone, but with, with friends, with family, with colleagues. And so the fact of, discussing, sharing ideas, exchanging, actually, this is not a nice thing, but this is what helps us also in clarifying and organizing our knowledge. Language, as in recent publications came out, language has the role of stabilizing and organizing grounded representation in knowledge. I wanted to mention another recent discovery that has been proved through experiments. That is the resonance between two brains, when a certain stimulus is provided to only one of the two brains. And somehow it is proved this emotional transfer that happens when there's when we're not alone, but with someone else. And then there's action. Before we start actually organizing our knowledge, we have to acquire it. And our conceptual system is grounded in language, but first of all in action, emotion, and in the perception system. So for us, and for those who work in designing interactive application, action is transformed into interaction. And coming back to real visit and cultural tourism, I've been searching for this talk about surveys on visitor expectations when starting for a journey. Actually, people are searching for meaning. So many will find in nature, in heritage and culture. Meaning making is something personal. What is meaningful actually for me, Sofia, might be not meaningful for you, for very personal reasons connected to our personal history and experience. And sometimes as archaeologists, because I am an archaeologist, I studied archaeology, as archaeologists or historians, we have to leave somehow the idea of being able to control meaning making and interpretation as well. And actually this also has been included in a recent approach in design, What meaningful means emerge in the studies I was mentioning to you on cultural tourist expectation. And it comes out from the search for memorable and authentic experiences accompanied by cultural contacts. Quoting from a paper, the primary focus should be on how to increase and improve the interaction between tourists and hosts that result in a fruitful cultural exchange. Are we able, with the online virtual exploration, to reach, to provide, to offer something similar, or can we, do we have to further explore VR interaction? So when considering all these aspects and also how to improve the virtual experiences in order to get closer to the findings of these researches, I start working on video games as a possible way to address emotion, cognition, action, meaning making, and also as a powerful way to promote cultural tourism. I have involved in a European project called Reveal. Reveal stands for Realizing Education through Virtual Environments and Augmented Locations. And the goal of this project was to develop a new framework that would help game designers and game developers to better create educational and applied games. So we have chosen to work on VR immersive technology, and specifically on Sony PlayStation VR, so with the headset. And we have selected also, we have decided to choose a specific type of games that seems particularly suited to historical and archaeological sites. That is the environmental narrative game genre. I don't know if you know this type of game, but actually they are games where you can have really reality-based or realistic scenarios where the player finds himself alone, usually, and he has to understand what has happened by searching for hints, and often those hints are objects that are found in the scenario or audio hints. And all these hints let him completing tasks and solving a certain mystery. So this project led us to work on a video game to test some hypotheses that we had at the beginning. That was focused on the Forum of Augustus in Rome. The title of the game is A Night in the Forum, and it was developed in cooperation with the Artron game company and with by CNR, and with the support of the Museum of Imperial Forum in Rome. So we tried really to adopt a co-design approach and work together. So we, to develop the game, we have started a reality-based acquisition campaign that has led us to reconstruct, first of all, the 3D scenario of the site as it is today, and use it in combination with all the available sources, so historical sources, archaeological, iconographic, and we also included the last archaeological discoveries in this really very central archaeological site in Rome. And we have reconstructed a new 3D, from that, a new 3D scenario of this site as it potentially was in the 1st century. So in the time when there was the Emperor Augustus. We have then identified, together with the museum experts, 35 learning concepts. Actually, those learning concepts were also those, the information that was given to the tourists visiting the site by the guides. Let me make an example, like the Forum of Augustus was a space for justice, for trials. Trials took place in tribunals. The forum was not open to all citizens, and like that. So 35 councils. And from these 35 elements, we have developed a story let me tell you the story of the game. So the story starts with a tourist that remains alone inside the archaeological site after a visit and finds on a stair of the Temple of Mars a shiny object, and the object is the one you see here. It is a helmet, a Roman helmet, and a voice is asking the player to pick it up. And there's we develop a one-to-one mapping of the object on a controller. So there's the feeling is actually to move the object in the hand. Actually, what happened when the player pick up the object, that the player is ported back in time in the 1st century, and he has to understand that what is going on. It's night. It is night. And this is why A Night in the Forum, the title. He has actually to find, the player has to find the guard post, and he has to become the guardian of the forum for one single night, and prepare the forum during this night before the opening of the morning. He finds a wax tablet, a tablet where in wax there was written, there was written the 8 tasks, and the player now starts to complete all the tasks, moving in the different rooms and spaces of the forum. So he has to go to the archives, to the tribunals, and each time he finds an object, he has to put back or reorder things, he hears voices from the past connected to the single object. The entire story has been organized in a certain way. So we have decided to follow a specific theory called the story grammar theory by Thorndike. It was a theory of the 70s actually, and the entire storyline was structured hierarchically. And the reason why we decided to use this specific technique is that it was proved that it simplifies this approach, simplify the memorization, memory recall, especially in the higher part of this hierarchy. So while the player moves, actually explores, pick up objects, and listen to voices from the past, he has the possibility to get information on Roman life during the imperial period, on Augustus, the emperor, on the justice system. This game was finally published last year in 2019. It is available in the PlayStation Store in 3 languages. It is an educational title that was published for, I think, around $3 and something. And we tried also to start a new economic model with a sharing of the revenue with the museum in itself. In this COVID period, we asked Sony to provide the game for free on the store, and we're still waiting from Sony to actually reply and make freely available the game. This year, 2020, the game is also available only for PlayStation 4, and it is not required in PlayStation VR. So to close this talk, I would like to anticipate something that we are currently doing. You've seen that we have some theoretical starting point, so we needed somehow now to check if the theoretical, the research questions were answered. So for this reason, we started an evaluation survey this year. Unfortunately, we had to stop the evaluation with the COVID, but we did some, some starting works, and actually, I'm going to give you some a bit of anticipation of what is coming out from the survey. So during the evaluation, I have analyzed the players divided into groups. What I was interested in understanding specifically, one of the elements I was interested in understanding is the role of distraction. So we are really distracted by our phones, by, there's continuous stimuli coming from outside. So I was interested in understanding how much this distraction can limit knowledge acquisition and memorization. So what I've done is I've been dividing the players into groups, and to a first group was asked just to play, while to the second group was asked before playing to do and to perform an activity. And actually I've adopted the performance by Marina Abramovic, Counting the Rise, as a way to somehow cut the external stimuli. The players were asked to leave the phones, watch, and to wear earplugs while doing the Counting the Rise. So first results are that, I don't know if surprisingly or not, the group who didn't play, who just played, sorry, the first group, made a lot of mistakes in the two questionnaires that was given to them, while the group with the Counting the Rise exercise had a 70% more successful correct answers to the questionnaires. It's just, a first result, but actually somehow, I don't know what do you think, but it's opening also a new, not a window, a new door on how also not only to develop our VR applications, but also the environment around us. So as to conclude, some conclusion. Key aspects to consider when developing a VR experience are certainly emotional, cognitive, and social engagement. Action needs to be included. Interaction is really a key thing, and actually interaction kept the attention more than audio information. Third, meaning making is something that is personal, and therefore any design strategy in this direction can help. Storytelling and immersivity absolutely contribute to create memorable, unique, authentic experiences. Distraction limits cognitive acquisition, and finally I can say that applied video games based on narrative and interaction could be a very good tool for cultural tourism. And that's all. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sofia. The third speaker for today is Joshua Chartrand. He has been a designer and developer at Carlton Immersive Media Studio for over 3 years. In April 2018, he graduated from Carleton University's Bachelor of Information Technology program with focus on interactive multimedia and design. He has overseen and contributed to many of the lab's digitally assisted storytelling projects, including the Senate Virtual Tour, Canada 150 VR Kiosk, the Canadian High Arctic Research Station Tour, and Parliament, the Virtual Experience. His focus is in the use of game engines to produce interactive experiences and games. Joshua, you can share your screen. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that introduction. So today I'm going to be talking about our virtual parliament project that we did here in Ottawa, the Canadian capital. And really it's about translating a heritage building information model into VR and the challenges that we underwent in that process. So just a brief little overview of what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to go over the lab that I work at, Carlton Immersive Media Studio, go over the definitions of HBIM VR, and then talk about two different forms of virtual reality, passive and active VR. And then I'm going to be talking about Parliament, the virtual experience, as a sort of case study for these practices. So heritage building information modeling has been a pretty valuable system for modeling historic structures for the last 10 years or so. But certain problems start to arise when we use these models, these really complex models, for other purposes. So I'm going to go over HBIM in the context of VR and go over a little history of VR in general. So Carlton Immersive Media Studio is a research center affiliated with Carleton University here in Ottawa, Canada. We're part of the Israeli School of Architecture. And we have a pretty large team of researchers, a very multidisciplinary team from all different backgrounds. It started a lot with architecture, but we have a lot of students now from public history, information technology, which is where my background is from, computer scientists. So we have a pretty mixed group of students and researchers in order to create these immersive experiences. Last summer, we had about 80 researchers, which is the largest the lab has ever been. And we continue to grow year by year. When I started 3 years ago, there was only about 25 or 30 of us, so it's grown quite quickly. And of course, once COVID hit, we had to figure out how we could continue our work remotely. So it's been a transition, a pretty interesting transition, as it has for most of us, but we were able to get accustomed pretty quickly. And we were able to hire new students and staff for this summer as well and start on new projects. So heritage building information modeling. Building information modeling is a really important tool for the architecture, engineering, construction industry, in the fact that it really allows the designers to sort of plan out their new buildings, but in the context of heritage, it allows us to sort of record a building's lifetime by incorporating data into the 3D model itself. And then, of course, virtual reality, which we're talking about today, is the immersion of a virtual environment through some sort of tool set. So we're pretty used to headsets for this, but it could also be some sort of gloves fitted with optical sensors, basically any sort of device to immerse yourself in some sort of virtual environment. I'm just going to go over a couple of the projects we've done in the past at SIMS in the HBIM space. So on the left there is the model we did for the Library of Parliament, which is attached to the Parliament buildings here in Ottawa, which was probably our most complex BIM to date, just due to the structure of the building and the amount of elements inside. And on the right there is the Muskogee residential school, which we actually worked with the National Trust last summer. And our work on HBIM goes all the way back to 2011 when we actually modeled the Bata Shoe Factory. It was one of our first BIM projects. We've also modeled the other Parliament buildings as well. There's 3 of them: Center Block, West Block, and East Block. And we were really able to use these models in different ways in a few different projects I'm going to be talking about. over the last few years, we've been able to play around with VR a lot, and we were given the opportunity with the federal government to work on a couple different VR experiences using those Parliament buildings. Shown here is the VR Kiosk Project, which was set up for Canada's 150th back in 2017. So for this project, we were able to tell the history of Parliament Hill through 5 individual 360 video experiences that were then loaded onto a headset, so the user could look all around them and experience it. This is one of the shots from one of those videos. And then more recently, we worked on Parliament the Virtual Experience, which actually just came out a couple weeks ago. So this is a little more active VR experience where the user is taken through 6 special spaces in the center block to, again, tell the story of Parliament Hill and the use of these different spaces and the overall structure of our government. And then this is a shot of some animations over top that model. The Canadian Parliament center block is actually going to be closed 10 years for rehabilitation. So models that we made in past years have really come in handy to show Canadians what their Parliament was like. And since they won't be able to visit it currently and for the next 10 plus years. So just to go over a brief history of VR, it's been around for quite a long time. A lot of us aren't really aware of that. It started really in the late 60s with an MIT research studio. They created this small game called The Sword of Damocles. And it's noted as the first VR and AR head-mounted display system. So as you can imagine, the screen was very, very small. It kind of looked like a set of optometrist goggles. And the user was able to completely look all around them to see a virtual display, which was nothing like it at the time. This kind of technology was used for military simulations in the past, so it's the first use in this sort of context. And then we skip over to the 90s, where we see virtuality, which is the first mass-produced VR arcade. It was also used at a lot of conferences. At this time, the devices were very expensive, and the resolution of the screens were still really small. We're thinking 200 by 300 pixels. So again, the technology just really wasn't there yet. And as we saw in the mid-90s, larger video game companies tried to get into the mix, but with not much success. So we've really seen a resurgence in the 2010s with the Oculus Rift Kickstarter, which was then bought by Facebook. And now we see all these other big players with their own VR headsets, Google, PlayStation, and the technology is increasing at a pretty rapid pace. When we talk about virtual reality, it really exists on a spectrum of mixed reality. So when we think traditional VR, it's really on the right side of the spectrum when you're fully immersed in a virtual environment, usually through a headset. But we also have things like augmented reality. So that's when digital elements are superimposed into the real world, usually through a camera on your phone. So if you think of Pokemon Go, that's an AR experience. And then there's also something called augmented virtuality, and that's where you're in a virtual environment, but those virtual objects are affected by things in the real world, usually some sort of data that affects what you see virtually. There's 2 main forms of virtual reality, passive and active VR. So when we're talking about passive VR, it's really about low interactivity, 360 video experiences. These are experiences where the user has a stationary viewpoint. They can't actually move around, but they can look all around them. So usually a panoramic animation plays out around them. As far as interactivity, usually there's some sort of hotspots similar to a virtual tour and some sort of simple controller input or a gaze control. So the user can look at part of the video and then that'll activate another part of the animation. So I'm just going to show a quick clip from one of those 360 videos that we did for Canada 150 that I mentioned earlier. This is just an export on YouTube. It's really meant to be viewed in a headset. But again, you're able to look all the way around as this animation plays out around you. So again, a very passive experience. There's not a lot of interactivity. It's really about telling a narrative in a different format. And this becomes really important in the sharing of heritage spaces and spaces that you can't normally see, especially now in the time of COVID. But even before that, like I had mentioned, these spaces are now closed off to the public here in Ottawa. So you're able to explore different parts of the building that you'd never get to see. So that's passive VR, but we also have active virtual reality. So this includes medium to high interactivity, scalable fully 3D environments, and the viewpoint depends on the position of the user because they can actually move around. They're not just looking around with their head, they can physically walk around, either actually moving around in their physical room or using some sort of teleport mechanic to go to another part of the virtual environment. And these experiences play out based on the user's actions. So usually there's a set of interactive objects and user interfaces, more complex controller input, and then again, like I said, teleporting to make your way around the room. So this here is an example of a active VR. This is just a test using one of the models we have for Parliament. So here I'm actually moving around the room. Sorry, it's a little laggy there. And not just stuck in one place. And like I said, this technology is growing pretty fast. The Oculus Quest just came out last year, and this is a headset that isn't tethered to a computer. It's completely portable, but it still allows the user to physically walk around their room and interact with the virtual environment in that sense, rather than just being stuck in one position. So when I first tried this, it's just so immersive because you don't have to click a button to move around the virtual room. You can literally walk around and you feel like you're in the virtual space. There's a couple things you want to consider when you build a VR experience. The first is the size of your environment. So how much do you want your user to move? Do they need to teleport around? It really breaks the immersion when you have to do that, right? So the more you can tether your experience to smaller spaces, the more immersive it can be. And then what are the key elements you want to show your user? What are the elements that are less important, and how can they be faked? Virtual reality is pretty intensive on a computer. It renders basically everything twice because there's two screens, one for each eye. So you really have to sort of optimize your 3D meshes in order to create a nice, smooth, pleasant experience for your user. So I'm going to quickly run through our virtual Parliament project just as a case study. So back in late 2017, we were approached by the Library of Parliament to work on this experience with them. Again, in preparation of the rehabilitation of Center Block, they wanted to showcase these models we've made in a narrative experience to the general public. And this was in collaboration with the National Film Board here in Canada. We also worked with a company in Montreal, DPT, that did all the interactive development in this experience. We were really just the set designers. So we had to take our Center Block model that you can see here, which is full of thousands and thousands of complex pieces, and then really curate 6 spaces, 5 of which are shown here, with proper textures, materials, and really keeping the quality of the spaces. There's a lot of one-click solutions out there, but we quickly found out that these one-click solutions to bring a Revit building information model into a VR platform through a game engine just doesn't really work for Heritage BIM because of the complex, unconventional nature of the geometry. So throughout this process, we really had to establish conventions early to really keep the quality of these spaces, but optimize the models down. And we did this in 3 different ways. The first of which were through creating a geometry level system. So we separated each room into 4 different geometry levels. GL1 being walls, floors, ceilings, basic shapes, onto GL4, which were more ornamental details, engravings, window tracery, that sort of thing. We also separated all of these meshes into 3 levels of detail for a heritage classification. So LOD1 were simpler elements with generic textures, again, things like walls. LOD 1.5 were more complex geometry where we really want to take the real texture and apply it to the mesh, usually through photogrammetry. And then LOD2 are completely photogrammetric meshes built completely from reality capture. So we didn't model those from scratch. We took a bunch of photos of the real elements and then put the actual photogrammetric mesh into the model itself. And this here is our mesh workflow. It took a lot of trial and error to figure out how we could get these Revit elements into Unity, which is the game engine of choice. And we hopped through a bunch of different software to do that, starting with some automation in Revit to take out the exact elements of each room that we wanted, cleaning that up in Rhino, and then applying proper textures in 3ds Max. We also borrowed a lot from traditional game development in order to, again, keep the quality of these spaces. So Revit models usually have generic materials, but we had to create our own custom materials for certain artifacts of the space. So here you can see the statue of Queen Victoria with several different texture maps applied. A normal map usually gives a sort of depth to a model, even though it's not physically modeled with the mesh. It's literally just a picture put on top of it. And then occlusion gives some shading to it, and then the albedo or diffuse map gives it color. Another technique we used was instancing geometry. So basically we were able to tell the game engine, this piece of geometry is repeated a bunch of times in the room. So instead of the computer having to calculate it multiple times, it just knows, let's say if there's 100 chairs, it knows, okay, this chair is just repeated a bunch of times and I can process it that way. And then lastly, another technique we used was billboarding geometries. So these chairs here are literally just 2 flat planes put together with images on them. And because they were further away in the experience, the user wasn't going to be beside them. We were able to really reduce the amount of objects in the scene for the computer. So the Library of Parliament model before had about 45 million polygons. It's a lot for a VR experience. You really want to keep it around 1 million. So after using all these techniques, we were really able to reduce the room. And it ended up looking something like this. So I'd like to invite everyone to check this out on YouTube. If you just Google Parliament the Virtual Experience, you should see it on the Parliament of Canada website. I'm just going to move that here. But it's pretty cool how these spaces turned out with all the interactive elements that DPT added with them. Thank you for listening, and that wraps up my presentation.
Great, Josh, thank you so much for your presentation. I think actually hearing the construction noise in the background makes me feel a little bit better about where I'm doing this from, and I know where a lot of us are working from right now. So thanks for persevering through those conditions.
Yes, I apologize.
No, you're good. It's very real. It's what we're all going through right now. So thanks for persevering and giving a great presentation anyways. The 4th speaker that I would like to invite to present is Jana. He's a building engineer working in the field of documentation, protection, and enhancement of tangible heritage. He received his master's degree in building engineering and architecture from the University of Catania in 2018. He got 2 Erasmus Plus scholarships at DNA Architects in Barcelona and a visiting research experience at the SIMS. In 2019, he was an external collaborator at the Politecnico di Milano to develop VR and AR experiences, and he gained a research fellowship at the University of Catania. He's currently working on the design of Mora, a museum of representation exhibition, and on the digitization and virtualization of Sicilian and European cultural heritage. Jana, please share your screen.
Yep. Thank you for your presentation. Well, in this difficult time when we are forced to stay at home, we all feel the lack of our freedom, and we are aware of the importance of traveling and getting in touch with other people. However, we are lucky because we live in a time when new technologies allow us to virtually break down physical and temporal distances, allowing us to get in touch with other people and allowing us to travel virtually. Perhaps we are realizing only now the great potential of new technologies, but in recent years, more and more museum institutions have begun to embrace these technologies in order to communicate their cultural heritage in innovative ways. In this context, the traditional idea of a museum as a mausoleum, that means a simple container of artworks, is gradually being abandoned. This paradigm, in fact, is no longer suitable for contemporary society, where the spectator, the user, doesn't want to be simply a passive spectator, but wants to become the real protagonist of the experience. You want to question themselves, and you want to interact directly with the artwork. In this regard, the application of technologies in the museum context has led to the definition of the concept of virtual museum. This concept was born recently, and therefore it is still fluid and under definition. We can define virtual museum as a digital entity that draws on the characteristics of the museum, the traditional museum, in order to complement, enhance, or augment the museum experience through interactivity, personalization, and richness of content. So we can say that virtual museum should not be considered as a simple digital replica of the traditional museum. It rather be seen as an extension of it. So it doesn't deny the concept of the traditional museum, but it completes it and expands it through the use of new technologies. In this climate of renewal, we are witnessing the birth of the concept of edutainment. And this is a neologism that was born from the combination of two words, education and entertainment. This term represents one of the key functions of the today's museum institutions, which are increasingly looking for new ways to communicate cultural heritage without separating the learning component from the playful one. So we can say that the concept of edutainment is at the base, is the core of the serious game, that is a type of game designed to learn while having fun. Now I'm going to show you two projects that I developed in the last years and that try to decline the concept of virtual museum in two different ways. Well, in order to develop both the experiences, I followed the workflow that you can see summarized in this slide. So the workflow starts from a design phase in which the target audience and the storytelling are defined, continues with the development, the modeling of the digital assets and the development of the game simulation, and ends with a user experience, a user evaluation that is necessary to propose implementations and improvements. The first project is part of my thesis and was born from the collaboration with the SIMS lab of Carlton University in Ottawa. So the aim, the goal of this project was to create a virtual museum that contains a great collection of masterpieces. So the project doesn't want to propose a simple virtual visit as an end in itself, but want to give something to the virtual visitor, want to give them an educational message useful for his personal growth. So we decided to create a fictitious environment in which it is possible to travel in time and to visit different historical periods. The museum is organized in 4 sections, and they are conceived as other worlds, as other dimensions that try somehow to revive the historical spirit, the historical epoch told in the section. The first section is the Egyptian one, and the entrance is marked by a stone thrillit. Beyond this portal, you can find three quadrangular rooms that are connected by narrow corridors, immersed in the silence and the penumbra, that aims to evoke the sacredness of the Egyptian temples and the funeral buildings. This room hosts some of the most iconic works of Egyptian art, such as the statue of Ramses II, the bust of Nefertiti, and the Rosetta Stone. The Greek section instead is marked by a portal with Ionic columns, beyond which there is a bay that tries to remind the coast of Anatolia, in which there was a naval battle to commemorate which the city of Samothrace realized the winged Nike that stands here in the water to somehow re-evoke the historical event. The Roman section instead opens with the ruins of a triumphal arch that leads into a garden in which we modeled the remains of a Roman domus. In the middle of the colonnade, we placed two marble busts, the bust of the Emperor Hadrian and the bust of Antinous, and we placed them one in front of the other just to emphasize the love bound that probably linked them during life. Leaving the Roman section and continuing along the way, we find the entrance of the art gallery, which is marked by the presence of two sculptures, the Moses by Michelangelo and the Rape of Proserpina by Bernini, that represent Renaissance art and the Baroque art. This section, in fact, contains some of the most famous works of the early modern art, such as the Spring, the Birth of Venus, or the Mona Lisa. And the enigmatic charm of Mona Lisa has been chosen to assign the presence of a mysterious element that is a portal, a temporal portal, that projects the visitor into another dimension, that is a dystopian futuristic dimension. Here you can see in the form of large holograms, three of the most famous symbols of our present that in this hypothetical future have been destroyed by man. At this point, the visit ends with the ideal delivery of the final message to the visitor, in front of which a video portrays ancient monument destroyed by ISIS. So the visitor is thus called to reflect and wonder if the dystopian future where he is could be its actual present. Everything is therefore connected by a single message. Cultural heritage is as beautiful as it is fragile, precisely because of the same people that have been able to create it. So after exploring the virtual museum, we will now see very quickly how to develop an experience like this. So the museum was modeled using a 3D modeling software that is Rhinoceros. Instead, the 3D objects were downloaded from an online platform that is Sketchfab. The model downloaded from Sketchfab are photogrammetric models, so they are very heavy to manage because they are made of a huge number of polygons. For this reason, we decided to retopologize the mesh. Retopologizing a mesh means reducing the number of polygons that compose it and changing the triangular layout into a quadrangular one that is lighter and easier to manage in a VR software. After retopologizing, the high detail texture of the triangular model is projected onto the optimized surface. In this way, at the end, we will obtain a model that is lighter, and so it is easier to manage in VR, but it has the same level of detail as the previous model because all the apparent details about the morphology of the surface is contained in the texture. Well, the entire model was then imported into a real engine. We have chosen this software because of the visual scripting blueprint system. It is a system based on a node interface that replaces the complex C++ programming language. So you just need to connect nodes to have an interaction instead of writing codes. However, the Timeless Museum is currently under evaluation in a museum at the University of Catania. In order to evaluate the effectiveness of the work, to understand how people interact with the virtual simulation, and even to have new ideas to improve the simulation, an evaluation test is periodically submitted to the visitors. And to date, we had very good opinions about the visit as a whole. From some comments, we know that a part of the sample expected a more playful component, and these data are very valuable for us because they help us to understand in which way to go and how to further develop our simulation. Now I'm going to show you a short trailer about the experience, where you can have a look at all the sections of the museum and where you can understand how to move in the virtual environment. So when you access for the first time the virtual museum, you will be guided by a narrator that will tell you all the story about every section. When you approach to a work of art, a panel with all the information about it will appear. One of the strengths of this virtual museum is the theme of the contextualization of the work of art. The basic idea is that an artwork is not only characterized by an intrinsic artistic value, but also by a geographical context and an historical period in which the artwork was born. So when we usually tear the artwork from its context and we close it in an anonymous room protected by glass barriers, it somehow loses a part of its soul. And this is the reason why we decided to use all the possibilities offered by VR in order to create different dimensions, different words that somehow try to give an idea of the historical context, the geographical context in which the artwork was born. Well, the second project that I'm going to show you was developed with Professor Cecilia Bolognesi, thanks to a research scholarship by Politecnico di Milano that I won to develop a virtual simulation of the Studio Museo Achille Castiglioni, the farmer studio of the architect and designer Achille Castiglioni. This place represents a small museum institution which is threatened with closure since it has to independently face its own economic sustenance and the lack of visibility. The workflow followed to develop this kind of experience started from a digital survey of the rooms of the museum through a laser scanner that, as you probably know, is a tool able to acquire distances in the real world through the use of laser pulses. The point cloud of the museum was then converted into mesh, and through a process called reverse modeling was used to obtain the digital replica of the museum. Instead, the design objects were developed, were modeled using 2D drawings by Castiglioni. All the digital assets were then imported into Unreal Engine, where it was where the simulation was developed. The main goal of this experience was to allow users to virtually visit all the rooms of the museum and to access all the design objects. So to do that, we set up a teleporting system that allowed the user to access all the rooms of the museum just by pointing the controller in the desired area. To do that, we use the blueprint system, as I showed you before. And now I'm going to show you some screen of the experience that you can see in these slides. But as soon I will show you a trailer of the experience to make you understand better how to move in the virtual environment. Well, the virtual simulation is still under development. At the moment, we are working on the playful component. In particular, we think to transform the simulation in, that is for now, a virtual visit, just a virtual visit, into a serious game, during which the user will have to overcome, will be called to overcome some challenges, to unlock some areas of the museum, and to access all the rooms of the museum. Once the last challenge will be overcome, the user will receive a prize that will help him to understand the design process behind every object and will help them to better understand the genius of Castiglioni. Well, now I'm going to show you a video of the user experience and where you can see a user exploring the museum rooms. To stimulate visitor, so one of the most interesting elements that you can find, as you can see from the video, is the Brion Vega radio that you can interact with to listen to 5 of the songs dear to Castiglioni. So you just have to press the button or the buttons of the radio with your virtual hand, and you can stop and play music that maybe you can hear because it's the background of the video. So to stimulate the visitor's interest and increase the sense of presence, the sense of being there, the user can interact with objects, can pick them up, can study them closely to understand their morphology. The user can change their location in the real world. And you can even interact with light sources, so you can switch on and switch off lights in order to understand the relationship between the light sources and the context. The experience was then enriched by some details that allow to get directly into contact with the Castiglioni personality. For example, you can, as you have seen, you can grab the design, the drawings by Castiglioni, or you can grab the famous blue round glasses of Castiglioni. We added all these elements because we wanted the user to feel, to perceive the presence of Castiglioni even in the virtual environment. Another interesting interaction is the movable TV that you can interact with to watch a documentary about Castiglioni's life. So you can know him better and you can know his design process better. So in conclusion, these two projects analyze two different types of virtual museum. One is based on the communication of cultural heritage in a fictitious environment. The other one instead is based on the documentation of an existing museum. In both cases, virtual reality has proven to be not only a very powerful tool to tell stories and to engage us emotionally, but also a very effective means to allow us to get in touch with others and to access cultural heritage from all over the world. And this is an extraordinary power, above all if you think to those people who cannot travel because of health reasons or economic reasons, or because of exceptional events such as the one we are currently experiencing. Well, it is important to notice that this virtual simulation never replace the real visit, but have the extraordinary power to help us overcoming any physical, temporal, or even cultural barrier. So we can imagine VR, to use the word of Chris Milk, as an empathy machine that make us feel close to each other and that can help us to access places far away from us. So, especially in this period during which we have been experiencing the meaning of loneliness and detachment, we can understand how important this sharing is. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jana, for the impressive presentation. Our last panelist for today is Rudy Novs. He has a PhD in media arts and has been a lecturer in experimental media and media archaeology at Lucas School of Arts, KU Leuven. In his artworks, he explores our fascination with illusionary spaces and integrates layered sound and vision into mixed reality constructions that enable novel ways of interaction and experience. His large-scale installation, Speculum Musurgica, for example, has been exhibited internationally. Since 2019, he coordinates a library of voices, an interdisciplinary research laboratory of the Alamir Foundation that in its 2 sound labs focuses on virtual acoustics and sound, and that fully supports the mission of the foundation and always in close collaboration with the research unit of musicology of KU Leuven. Rudy, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. Also, I want to say thank you to the other panelists for the interesting talks. Okay, I will discuss in this part of the panel, I will discuss how we at the Alamir Foundation use forms of mixed reality to work with music, with intangible heritage. The Alamir Foundation is a not-for-profit organization. We work closely together with the University of Leuven, with the Department of Musicology, Old Music, and also with the Department of Engineering Sciences, as I will discuss later on. The Alamir Foundation is the International Center for the Study of the Music of the Low Countries, and the focus is on music from the 12th till the 18th century. with a preference for the polyphonic music from the 14th to the 16th century. The seat of the foundation is since 2011 in Park Abbey, just at the outskirts of Leuven. And we have there one of the gate buildings which houses our House of Polyphony. We use in our research on music, we use a number of instruments to do that research, to support that research. And one of the instruments that we use is what we call our Alamire Digital Lab. This is a mobile lab that tries to trace and tries to digitize every manuscript that is still available, that has been dispersed since the 15th, 16th century through Europe and to the other continents. And we digitize on high resolution. And we publish these digitized pictures, these digitized manuscripts in a database to make it available as soon as possible, as quickly as possible for research and also for performers that work with this kind of music. The database is called the Integrated Database for Early Music. The website is here. So it's very high quality, and the goal is to shorten the time gap between finding a document and digitizing the document and publishing it online, so that we support the research that is ever going on. The performers that we work with, that's also very important in our working, because we have we have a number of ensembles in residence, like for example here in the right-hand bottom, Capella Pratensis, which is a top-class ensemble for performance of Renaissance polyphony. And the practice-based research that they carry out with the Alamire Foundation is often it's often reflected in a series of concerts that we program as Alamire Foundation, or sometimes in collaboration with the Concert Hall of Amuse, like the well-known yearly festival Laus Polyphonia, that this year is only playing online. Another way that we disseminate our research results is by setting up exhibitions that incorporate new technologies to make this complex musicological or musical content available to a wide audience. For one of these exhibitions, I made this installation, Speculum Musurgica. It's 5 years ago. It's a large-scale installation that presents a number of 7-voice polyphonic pieces. And the idea and the concept of the installation is that the visitors can freely explore the content by walking about in the installation. The installation presents 7 voices, sound and vision, so that the visitor is immersed, can explore the music from within. And this approach already demonstrates that it is possible, by using new technologies and technologies that are available, to create meaningful experiences and also bridge a gap in experiences between this old musical heritage and contemporary audiences. Since September 2018, we have a new seat, a second seat in Park Abbey in Heverlee, which we call the Library of Voices. It's another gate building. And this is another research tool that we have now. It's a library, it's a physical library, but it's also a sound laboratory. In fact, it's 2 sound labs that have a different function, which I'll explain now. On the first level of the building, where also the physical library is housed, we have what we call the Alamire Analytic Lab. This lab is geared towards the analysis of the complex musical texture of polyphonic music. Polyphonic music is layered music, it's multi-voice, it's very complex. And with this lab, we try to develop an instrument that makes it possible for musicologists and other people that study this music and are interested in this music to analyze this music in a different way than was before possible. Technically, this lab consists of a high resolution screen, a 20 speaker array that consists of speakers that are mounted in a horizontal plane just underneath the ceiling. A number of amplifiers to power the speakers, and a Timex auralization processor. The complete setup of this lab, of this analytic lab, enables us to auralize up to 64 different sound objects or different sound channels or voices in the physical space of the lab. So this is already a kind of a mixed reality application. We are developing a number of case studies where we go from 1 voice to 8 and more voices, so that we have a number of cases that we can demonstrate that are already implemented in the lab. One of the cases that I made in the past started from the 7-voice installation that I discussed very briefly a few minutes ago. And you see here on the screen the 7 performers of the Huelgas ensemble. And alongside the images of the singers, you have the sound of the 7 singers that can be freely distributed, positioned, and spatialized, auralized in the physical lab. There's one drawback. If this is just a linear video that's being played out, the analytic value is limited, because analytic value then lies in taking a position or approaching one of the sound sources that is being positioned in the lab. So we went one step further, and we use these materials in an interactive way, so that, I used MaxMSP to build an interface so that you can consider each one of the performers as a button that you can enable or disable. So just clicking on one of the performers enables or disables the sound. And in this way, this becomes a very intuitive and very strong way to explore the complex musical texture of polyphonic music in a way that was before not possible. The requirements to be able to do that is to record music as a multi-track source, or in a let me see. Well, we usually use multi-track so that you can isolate one of the 7 or 8 or whatever voices that you input in the system and blank out the other ones. The lab on the second level of the library of voices works in a completely different way. It's also a speaker array. It's 24 speakers, 6 microphones, and the engine that powers everything is an astrospatial audio processor. This lab we call interactive because this is not a playback lab. This is to work with real-time, real-life performers in the lab. Hence also the use of the microphones. It's, however, not a recording lab. It's intended to study the parameter of acoustics and its value in the study of old music. In musicology studies, acoustics has not been studied very deeply yet. And that's something that we want to tackle. So we want to tackle the importance of acoustics for a performance, but also for musical musicological study of, for example, the work of one composer. It's well known that Josquin des Prés, one famous Renaissance composer, has worked in the north of France. He has worked in Italy. He has worked in Paris. And in these different periods in his life, he has composed in different style. There are changes in composing style. And this is probably not just linked to the cultural clash or the cultural embedding in a different country, but it's also probably linked to the constraints that an architectural situation, that a specific space a building has, and the possibilities that a building has. So that's what we are studying here. And this is a really interdisciplinary study that we've carried out together with of course, the musicology department of KU Leuven for musical performance, but above all, in this case, also the Department of Electrical Engineering of KU Leuven especially the group that works on audio engineering under supervision by Toon van Waterschoot. We focus in this approach on the correlation between the source, the manuscripts, the performer, and the environment where the performance could have been carried out in the past. And for that reason, the lab, the engineers of audio engineering are carrying out acoustic measurements of still existent environments that were important in the evolution of polyphonic music, mainly churches. That's the first step. And building on that knowledge in the near future, they will also go into archaeoacoustics and try to reconstruct lost acoustics of lost buildings, buildings that have been important in this period of the 14th to 16th century, but that are not existent anymore. So combined with what we learn about acoustic modeling and also archaeological findings, archaeological data that still exist of buildings that have been lost to this time, it will be possible to make conjectures of what the sound can have sound like in these places. With these types of work, well, this is a few images of people working in the lab. With this type of work, we are already situated within the virtuality continuum that Joshua already mentioned in his interesting talk. The virtuality continuum was already mentioned or introduced, or well, the concept was defined by Milgram and Kishino in 1994, so that's 25 years ago. And they they mainly discussed the visual displays, but this continuum of this concept that there is a continuum of hybrid forms between a real environment and a virtual environment is also applicable to sound. Look, for example, what we do with virtual acoustics in the interactive lab. That is an application of augmented reality for sound only. So this is really in line with what we are doing. Also being aware that what we do in the two labs is already, in the one lab it's oralization, spatialization. In the second lab it's adding a virtual acoustic to real sound. These are technologies that are being used in virtual reality and different forms of mixed reality. So it's logical to, in addition to the acoustical side of what we have in these labs, also to add the visual side. So we decided from the start that we would also do, in addition to measuring the acoustic models of buildings that have been important, to also do a reconstruction of a visual model using photogrammetry or laser scanning. This is a point cloud using only photogrammetry. We will definitely use laser scanning because this quality is too limited for what we do. To conclude, I want to remark that the reason to also invest in visual 3D models and visual aspect of mixed reality is for us not just to have materials to put in papers to illustrate what you described, but also to gather research data, maybe to support the archaeoacoustic investigation that is scheduled for the near future, but also to gather assets that we can use together with the data that we can generate, starting from virtual acoustics, the data that we have from the musical performance. So to create new ways that we can deploy in new forms of installation, new forms of exhibition, to reach out with these research materials to a wide audience. And I think that this is important because many different forms of mixed reality or extended reality, how it's also used, are named nowadays, whether it's augmented reality or virtual reality or something in between. These forms of media have become part of our visual vernacular. And it is important to use these possibilities of media to bring this complex content of intangible heritage to a present day audience, a wider audience than that we often reach in concerts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rudy, for that great presentation. I think it really complements all of the other presentations that we've seen here today. And I think it was a really great and unique experience to have people from a similar yet very different backgrounds all talking today. So thank you to all of our speakers for the time, be it morning or very, very late today. Right now, we're going to enter into the question and answer period. So please keep your microphones muted at all times. Express your questions only through the Q&A option and not through the chat box. Upvote the questions of others so that way we can choose those that are most common amongst the audience and address them to the panelists accordingly. We want to inform you that no offensive language, spamming, or mansplaining will be tolerated. Switch off your video to improve network bandwidth, and only the speaker should have his or her video on. Sarah, please take away the question and answer period.
Thank you very much. And thank to all the presenters for their beautiful and interesting presentation. So we have some questions. I have to say that Sofia is really sorry, but she has a class, so she has left. But the question that have done to her, maybe the other panelists can answer if they want. So I would like to start with the first question that was for Brett. And can you mention the limitation that you have been facing so far, Brett? If Brett is, yes. But we can't hear you.
I'm just unmuted.
Oh, yeah.
So how's that better? Can you just give me that question again? I just missed half of it.
Can you mention the limitation that you have been facing so far?
We've been on this for a while, so I have to say this in terms of the many years we've been on it and on the journey. And one of the things I'm finding is that within our own First Nations groups, there is conflict in terms of their sovereign determinations for land ownership in Australia, and particularly in urban centres and regional towns. And there is a lot of discussions, and I think our Canadian brothers and sisters will understand this question of land rights. And in that regard, we have a lot of troubles with getting groups to sort of collaborate and work with us, and also to not get caught up in the politic when we're trying to tell our stories. So that's one of the big hurdles we've got. And then secondly, the work we do, it's time consuming and it is expensive. I think many of us will know that. And when you're like us in ourselves, we're not really a university, we're not even a not-for-profit, and we don't get grants. We're all self-funded and sponsored. But we've got a passion for this, and given the limitations of the resources we have, we can only do so much. So we're always trying to find new and innovative ways that are cutting edge and fast and allows us to iterate, which means step along a continuum to get to what we ultimately want, which is what was so wonderfully described by, I think, Rudy at the end there. Rudy. And I think that that's where we want to be. We want to really take people into that space. And I think that limitation of community, that limitation of technology, and that limitation of resources to allow, you know, my creative team in particular to work collaboratively to get these outcomes are probably those big obstacles. But let me say this, we are not giving up. We are doing it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is a question, I think, for everyone. How are you planning to use virtual reality headsets in museum in this time of pandemic? Meaning, there is a possibility to change, use something different, wait until the end of the pandemic. If someone wants to answer.
If I can just drop in again, sorry to interrupt, but maybe some others are doing this. We were doing a lot of VR work, and our big last VR work was on Australia Day here in Australia on the 26th of January. But then, as we all knew, this COVID turned up, and I think that social distancing meant that VR headsets for us needs to take a pause. I think everybody's in the same boat. So we pivoted to look at and explore multi-user virtual heritage environments where we can get communities into those spaces in the comfort of their lounge chairs in their homes. I don't know if anybody else has pivoted in the same way, but if you're building these virtual heritage landscapes, you're building an environment first with a view of what camera, what lens are you using to see those spaces, and the technology we know and have is an enabler for that. And as I've seen around my colleagues here, we are really building spaces for people that reflect those instruments or those monuments or those spaces that allow our communities to practice and rekindle and maintain their culture and naturally their identity.
Yeah, I think we're really seeing a shift from these single player individual experiences to much more multi-user, multiplayer experience in the VR space. I've seen a couple conferences since COVID started that are, they're basically VR conferences where you can see the other attendees in some sort of virtual room with an avatar. That's becoming a lot more popular to do. So definitely see a shift there for sure.
Okay, so we can go to another question. This can be also a question interesting for all of you. It was for Sofia, but it's for all of you. How can we incorporate the qualities and importance of language and action into VR simulation, online cultural heritage, and 2D platforms that are most often viewed alone? If someone wants, I think that it can be also considered for the audio and video immersive experience. Like, how do you, can we incorporate everything? Like Rudy, for example, showed audio and video. It was really impressive. It was really interesting. How can we put everything all together? It's a possibility. It's difficult. It's impossible. It's something that we have to work.
I think we're slowly getting there with newer headsets, like I had mentioned with the Oculus Quest. I mean, you don't even need to be tethered to a physical computer anymore. That alone just allows more immersion between the virtual and physical space. And there's more devices being researched and investigated to enhance immersion with the feeling of touch and things like that. I saw I don't know if it was a technical paper a couple weeks ago, an example of some sort of string device that was attached to the user's headset and then on their hand. So it could basically hold their fingers when they touched a virtual wall or something of a physical form in the virtual space to make it feel like you're actually touching that object in the virtual environment. So I think slowly we're trying to incorporate all of these different senses into VR experiences.
Thank you.
Could I add to that just quickly? I'm gonna maybe complement that a bit and just mention we're looking at the degradation or the loss of languages in Australia, which is important. And in our virtual worlds, we are augmenting each object in the world with a text-based word, and then we are using phonetics to virtually reconstruct that. Our worlds are ambisonic three-dimensional worlds, which means that our audio attenuates over distance. And we've been working with that for a while to allow songlines to be explored. We also have a transitional state in the world where Dreamtime stories can then be permeated out of ancestral spirit beings which exist within the stars through our time of day and our link to the Bureau of Meteorology, which allows our landscapes to change over time and space or be accelerated. And in that world, that allows across regions the different languages and the different dialects to be respected in that space, within that geological space. And I think that that audio is important. Now, we haven't got to the wonderful aspect of smell yet, but we do want people to stop and smell the roses in our virtual world.
Okay, thank you. I have a few questions for Damiano. Okay, the first one that is technical. Which software did you use to retopologize the mesh? Sorry.
I used ZBrush. It is a software for modeling, texturing, and painting in 3D. So through this software, you can manage very complex geometries. So you can model, but you can even fix the mesh. You can paint the texture directly on your 3D mesh, or you can fix the texture. I think that the most interesting characteristic of this software is the possibility of retopologizing a mesh. Because if you want to create virtual experiences of cultural heritage, you usually work with digital survey. So you use laser scanner, photogrammetry, and you obtain a very heavy model, a very heavy mesh that you want to import in a VR software. So I think it's a very fundamental step to create the VR experiences of cultural heritage.
Okay.
Thank you for the question.
You have other two questions. Okay, the other one. You said that VR has enormous potential and allows you to live unique experiences. But don't you think there could be also the risk that an excessive use of VR could push potential users to take refuge in the illusion and give up real experience?
Well, it's a very nice question. Maybe the other panelists can help me to answer.
It's for everyone. But
well, I think that this risk actually exists. And I think it is connected to all the technologies that we use today, from computers to smartphones and so on. This problem should never be ignored. And I think that it is necessary to use tools like VR in the right balance. So for example, you have to remind users that VR simulation is just a fictitious experience. So it can never replace the real experience in the real world. However, VR is a very fundamental tool for those people who want to access cultural heritage in a very deep and unconventional way. For example, I think about researchers that want to study closely artworks that maybe are far away from them. VR can help you to access them, and through VR you can do actions that you cannot never do in the real world. For example, you can manipulate the object, you can scale them, you can change, manipulate it, pick it up, and so on. So I think that VR is an essential tool, above all for the people who cannot travel, as I said before, the people who doesn't have the possibility to have experiences because of a lot of reasons that can be cultural, health, and economic. And for them, VR become the only tool that they have to have this kind of experiences. In my opinion, the important thing is always to do our best so that VR is used more as a means than as an end. So it's important that users know what are they going to do and what are the advantages and disadvantages of the VR simulation, of having this kind of experiences.
Thank you. And another one, I've seen that most of the works presented tackle build physical elements that already exist. Your museum, your museum project, in the meantime, is somehow a proto-narrative, speculative in a way, something that doesn't exist. How did you manage to build the authorship of that narrative? How did you structure it?
Well, this was my master thesis. So we are talking about the first museum, right?
I think yes, because he's asking
the one that doesn't exist in the reality.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So it was just an experiment. It was my first time approaching VR. So I wanted to create something new, and I was very interested in the topic of museum because we know that traditional museum have some limitations because you cannot touch objects. As I said, usually when you expose an object in a museum, you tear this object from its context. So somehow it loses something. And my aim was to recreate the environment. So it is based just, this project is based just in my interpretation of the work of art. For example, all the meshes that I used are meshes that are free. They are downloadable in a free way from the web. So what I did was to try to understand the context of the artwork. For example, the Nike, the winged Nike, was built to commemorate a naval battle. So I tried to recreate the context. I decided to recreate the sea, and I put the statue in the sea. Or for example, the Emperor Hadrian had a love affair with Antinous. And I tried to link their sculptures together, the busts together, to emphasize this link because I wanted to recreate a context. Obviously, this is just a prototype, so everyone can develop this kind of a museum as they want. And it is I think that when you develop this kind of experiences, everything is connected to your sensibility and the way you interpret the work of art.
Okay. So I have a question for Rudy. What factors are simulated when trying to recreate acoustics in an historical space that no longer exists? Building materials, air humidity, density, if there is a thing that affects acoustics in a way. We can't hear you. Your mic is, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. I also missed part of your, so about acoustics, what exactly?
What factors are simulated when trying to recreate acoustics in an historical space that no longer exists?
Well, the simulation will be based on, well, that's maybe not directly an answer to your question, but that's the first part of an answer to your question. simulation will be based on knowledge that we will have built up of modeling or capturing, measuring the acoustic data models of still existing places so that we see how they work. So that's the expertise that we're building up now. And combined with the data that we have about, for example, a church like Saint Donat in Bruges, which was very important for the history of polyphonic music, which only the ground plans exist. And we have some descriptions of the interior, how it was, what building materials had been used. So these elements can be input into the engine that generates the reflection characteristics of the materials. So it's based on that we can make a conjecture of what a hypothesis of what the acoustic could have been. But that's, of course, it always remains a hypothesis. And when you have a large database of places that you have been digitizing, modeling, and measuring, then you can compare your hypothesis to existing models to try to foolproof them and to have more certainty of this might approach a real situation in the past for 70% or for 60% or for 80%. But, conjecture.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. Joshua, for you, how long did it take you to create the H-beam model of Parliament?
Yeah, so the process began back in 2015, I believe. We were asked to work on the center block first. I don't know if it was the center block or the west block. And after the completion of each building, we kind of moved on to the next. East block, we only did the exterior. And we're still actively working with the company that's doing the rehabilitation on the center block remodel. So it took multiple years with a team of about 7 to 10 students working full times in the summer to produce the actual building information models. But the process to take the BIM and bring that into a game engine space for the VR experience, that took about, I'd say 8 months or so. We started with the library as the first room, and it took us a while to figure out the workflow for that. And once we had that solid, then we were able to move on to the 5 other rooms pretty quickly. So a lot of that was just sort of figuring out the workflow.
Okay, thank you. So I just have one question for all of you, and then we have to leave the floor. For visitors in museums or in an archaeological area, do you think that it's better to have a guided virtual tour or a first person experience? Because we know that virtual guided tour can be boring, but if you give a complete freedom to the visitors, maybe they can be distracted, they cannot see important things. So which technical aspects do you use or do you suggest to use to guide the visitors without guiding them? I don't know. It's for all of you.
I think this platform really allows us to play around with interactivity, right? So what was shown in the second presentation, there was different sort of tasks the user was asked to do to explore the museum. So I think somewhere in the middle where you have some sort of guide directing you a path, but then you allow the user to explore things on their own to then proceed with the experience. So adding traditional game elements definitely helps with that.
Thank you. There's someone else that wants to answer?
I might try. our work is about deconstructing museums. Our landscapes are upwards of 2,000 kilometres by 2,000 kilometres in size. Museums tend to hold our artefacts, and we want to take those artefacts that might be behind glass windows, clubs, shields, like the stuff behind me, and place those artefacts at the times they were constructed, where we know that veracity of that object, into the virtual space and put it into the hands of that constructor. We are actually also doing models where we're putting the spears that were taken back by Captain Cook's ship back to London, and then putting it back into the hands of anybody who wants to stand on the beach at Botany Bay and decide whether they want to throw that spear at a virtual Captain Cook or negotiate. And if I go into a very serious statement, there are human remains held in museums across the world, and there's a very important practice of repatriating those remains. We want to take those remains and virtually place those remains back into the spaces they belong. So beyond the fact that we're talking about user experiences, I'm talking about multi-user environments that allow people to empathize, to learn and understand that deep connection, at least in Australia, with the view of a toolkit that can be taken further afield over time. In effect, we want to build a time machine, as I've said.
Thank you. Okay, so I would like to thank you all again for your wonderful presentation and all the really interesting answers that you gave us. And I'm leaving the floor to Professor Graziatucci for the closing remarks. Thank you again.
Thank you, Sarah, for inviting me again. It's really a pleasure to be with all of you again. And I would like to point out just some final considerations on today's interesting topic. As already mentioned in the introduction, I would like to reflect on the implication of using virtual and augmented reality technologies in such a period and the push given by the current pandemic situation to their use. These technologies have so far been considered more as a nice to have than an investment for productivity and efficiency. But the COVID crisis has highlighted the usefulness of these immersive tools for distance learning and training purposes by using augmented reality, virtual reality, or 360 videos. They also proved to be effective for remote training of professionals in enterprises for specific tasks, or to remotely guide non-specialized operators. Applications in medicine are already being tested with virtual and augmented reality supported by 5G, and they will be real soon. In the business sector, we have seen also the first completely virtual fashion show with avatars wearing the clothes. E-commerce companies are increasingly using 3D and immersive technologies to show their products. For what concerns the cultural heritage context, as extensively presented by our panelists today, these tools have offered during the lockdown the opportunity to remotely visit heritage places, experience immersive contents, thus engaging and involving different audiences even from their home. All the cultural institutions that provided these contents have managed to offer part of the culture and heritage they represent behind the physical boundaries of a place or a building, thus making them available and accessible for all. Immersive storytelling coupled with the serious games represents a full tool to let wider audiences know new cultures, arts, stories, heritage traditional knowledge and histories, as for Australian Aboriginal heritage in Australian capital cities and the regional town in the first presentation. This way of communication and users' engagement may find also useful applications in the education field, where game-based learning coupled with storytelling is becoming an effective and captivating tool for younger learners. A serious game-based approach has been adopted also in the second presentation, where the video game A Night in the Forum is used to teleport the users in the Emperor August's time. These environmental narrative video games, accurately based on historical digital reconstruction of the archaeological spaces and historical contents, have already proved to be appreciated by the public, who can experience enhanced and immersive contents in every place and whenever they want. The third contribution has presented an application of two innovative technologies, such as HBeam and virtual reality applied to build heritage. The intrinsic potentiality of a powerful tool like HBeam for design and management purposes may be further expanded by the advantages offered by virtual reality in terms of communication, visualization, interaction, and information. Some examples of virtual museums have been presented by the fourth panelist. The immersive and interactive approach used seems effective in expanding the usual physical experience in a museum. Both the study cases presented interesting concepts and possibilities offered by virtual reality, like the importance of contextualization of the work of art and the emotional involvement given by interaction. This technology allows a democratization of cultural context access by overcoming all kinds of physical, temporal, and cultural barriers. The last contribution has offered a very interesting overview of another important content for virtual reality application, sounds and music, in their connotation of intangible heritage. The integration of the real environment with the digital reality for mixed reality approach seem very innovative and interesting. To conclude, the use of a virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality technologies in cultural heritage helps CIPA's mission of encouraging the development of principles and practice for the recording, documentation, and information management for all aspects of cultural heritage, and of supporting the development of specialized tools and techniques in support of these activities. Thank you.
Sarah, you're muted.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you. So thank you very much, Grazia, for your closing remarks. Thanks to all the presenters, the moderators, the participants to this interesting webinar. Just to finish, I would like to present you this special issue for the Remote Sensing Journal, 3D Virtual Reconstruction for Cultural Heritage. The deadline for contribution is 15 March 2021. So maybe if someone of you is interested in publishing her or his research, think about it. Thank you very much again to everyone, and have a good day, night, morning, or whatever. Thanks.